we kind of just do a quick little bio and we'll jump into it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But do you have any other questions? Because you said you had a couple questions you were asking about.
I think you answered them
Yeah.
already. I like what you do. I bet you draw a lot of different people from different interest areas and all that. Do you stay away from politics?
Well, we tried. But it didn't really work out. I mean, then it hasn't worked out. We're trying to stay away from it, to be honest with you. But it's hard. It's intertwined in everything now, right? So we really try to stay in the middle at least anyways, but it's very difficult. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It is difficult.
Yeah,
it's a challenge.
But we do, although we talk about a lot of strange topics, we do try and stay very grounded and we have fun. Yet we sort of also like we like your part about your character as well, right? You write about a good character, so that's a big part of our show too. Is just trying to be truthful and the best people we can be as well.
Yeah, so. I've been involved in character education for more than 25 years now, and it just. I'm really glad to see it grow in our schools.
Yeah,
especially
that's great.
if it's done right.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Right,
so Darren's going to start up the recorder, and we'll do a quick bio, and we'll jump into it.
Okay.
All right, we've got a bit of a different episode, a little bit of a sidetrack here. We've got Hal Urban with us. He's an award-winning teacher and author. He's written and taught a lot about character education. He's written 7 books, and he's got a new one coming out in next year, but a couple popular ones like Life's Greatest Lessons and Positive Words, Powerful Results. So it's funny. We were just chatting before we started recording. It fits into like what Darren's been preaching in the last little while about, what goes into your mind creates who you are. So we're happy to have you here, Hal. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you and answer whatever questions you have and maybe learn something myself.
Yeah, and we do want to talk about your new book. What was the title of your book that hasn't come out yet?
The main title is The Power of Good News. The subtitle is Feeding Your Mind with What's Good for Your Heart.
Nice. When we started this podcast, we were actually going to make it about good news. We were just going to do good news. Man, and did we ever go off track there, Darren? For a few years?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But we noticed how important it was like 7-8 years ago, that there wasn't enough good news out there. We wanted to focus on those stories that that are positive.
The thing is, and one of the main reasons I wrote the book is even before the awful news of 2020, I thought even before this, the news media, the mainstream news media tends to focus about 95% on negative stuff. And I started doing some research on why, because I still remember a political science professor in college told us, somebody asked, why is the news always bad? And his answer was real simple. He says, because bad news sells and good news doesn't. And there's a lot of truth to that. There was a story about a guy that started a good news magazine and it went out of business after about 3 months, and a lot of it has to do with the way we're wired. We have a defense system inside us. I'm trying to remember. I think it's called the amygdala. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but it's a little neuron type thing in the brain that alerts us when there's danger. And so if you go way back to the days of early human beings, there were animals out there bigger than them looking for a meal, and they were not only bigger, but stronger and faster. And so a certain sound would warn the human that there was a hungry animal nearby. And so you need that to protect yourself. And so it's a long history of people pay more attention to bad news because they're warnings in a way than they do to good news. So.
Yeah, I was always kind of skeptical of that. It's good to hear your take on that. I always thought, is it really that bad news sells, or are they just saying that, because that emotional response gets us to buy things and consumerism and all the ads and all that stuff. Because you'd think that there'd be a euphoria or some sort of elation with good news that would sell as well, but I guess it doesn't, it doesn't sell the right thing. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, but they have done a lot of research, and they do know that bad news grabs your attention quicker.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why you turn on the news on TV, it'll always be something sensational that they flash at the beginning and it's supposed to hook you. And it's usually something negative. You know, once in a while, like last night on TV, the good news was that they had tested the vaccine and it was 90% effective. And that was very hopeful. And I was really glad to see them open the show with something positive for a change, you know.
Yeah.
But we do have a defense system in us, and that's one of the reasons that bad news grabs our attention. And like I say, there have been people that have experimented with it, and they couldn't sell their good news. In fact, when I started back in 2018, I started contacting publishers about this book, and I got turned down left and right. And the answer was always, well, we already know that good news doesn't sell. And my original publisher wouldn't take it. Even my original agent, he wouldn't represent me. He said, because, let's see, I don't know, can you use the F word on the show?
Yeah, you sure can.
I don't use it publicly or whatever, but this is the actual word that my agent said. He said, you know, he says, if the title of your book was Bad Fucking News, he said, I'd represent you in a second. We'd sell millions. And I thought, how sad, you know?
You should have just titled it that and then just kept all the content the same. And then
I have to say, surprise, surprise, this is about good news. But one of my points is that there really is an enormous amount of good news. There's much more good in the world than there is bad, but the bad gets all the attention. And I don't know if you're aware of, have you ever heard of a Swedish doctor named Hans Rosling? Rosling.
I'm not sure.
Well, he wrote a book. He died a couple of years ago. He was one of those brilliant guys that had a PhD in something, and he was also an MD, and he was from Sweden. And he felt that the world is always being distorted because the bad gets so much publicity. And he wrote this incredible book. It's an easy read. It's called Factfulness, 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 Hans Rosling. And he actually died just before it was finished, but his son and his daughter-in-law promised him that they would finish it up for him. And you've probably heard that Bill Gates reads about 50 books a year, and then he talks about the best books he's ever read. And this was one of his favorite books. And one of the things he said is this is based on facts. And he shows you over and over and over how things in the world are improving. They have been improving for a long time. There's more good than bad, but it doesn't get publicity. And that's the real issue.
What's
so what
his
I'm
name?
really trying to do in the book is to get people to understand bad news will find you, but you have to look for good news.
Yeah.
But it's healthy. You know, it's healthy. Anytime you read, or I even have a chapter on friendship. To me, good friends are good news. Every time my email goes off, I see ping and I see a name of a friend, my happy hormones get stirred up. You know, good friends are good news. And there's so many things that we have to be thankful for that we need to think about it more often.
So is it like the bad news sells? So the good news doesn't sell, but it's better for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you know, what's interesting is that there are some people now who are catching on, and there are some websites that deal with good news, and there are some good news newsletters. I subscribe to an email I get every Monday through Friday, and it's from the Good News Network, and it gives you 4 uplifting stories every day. And then, are you familiar with The Week magazine? No. It's a weekly news magazine that I really, really like, and I get emails from them, and they also have one that produces good news. And then, you know who Arianna Huffington, you know, she's a big media person. She's really, in fact, she told me that when the book came out, she would help promote it. And I almost turned cartwheels because she's pretty big time in the media. So there are a number of people moving in that direction. There's a woman in Texas. Her name is Michelle Geelan. and she's been very helpful for me. She has a book out called Broadcasting Happiness, and she's talking about how when you start a conversation with somebody, try to say something positive right off the bat to get the conversation off. And I even go farther back than that. I say, make the greeting be fun, and say something uplifting or funny during the greeting. And I have a couple pages in there, which I'm famous for my greetings.
Yeah, well, you've been writing. I mean, that's in some of your older books. The one I read was about the positive words and powerful results, and this is some of the stuff you're talking about in that book.
I do have, you have a good memory. I do have something about that in that book, because that book, Positive Words, Powerful Results, is really in many ways tied to this book, because this book is about what goes into your mind, and the other book is about what comes off your tongue, but actually I should have written this one first, because that's, even in the Bible, it says, I can't remember who said it, but I know there's a verse in there that says, what's stored in your heart, what comes out of your mouth is what's stored in your heart. And heart means all kinds of things, the way it's used. It means general health. It means your whole self and all of that type of thing.
So if we know the good news is good for us, but the bad news is we're more wired for the bad news, and we got the TV kind of using that against us.
Yeah.
And now we've got the social media networks, kind of, expanding that on a by magnitudes. And then it's like, so, because I was looking at that before by it's bad enough that they're kind of pushing the narrative and trying to manipulate you, but now you're kind of hardwired to do it to yourself at the same time.
Yeah. And you have to, I don't know if you've ever heard of Sean Achor, Achor. He was teaching at Harvard in positive psychology along with Tal Ben-Shahar. Tal Ben-Shahar was the guy who taught, at the time, it was the most popular course in the history of Harvard University. It was just called positive psychology. And Sean Achor taught with him. And one of the main points he makes, and I mentioned it in the book, is that what we have to do is to retrain our brain. In other words, the bad news is going to find us. My recommendation to people is don't avoid it, just don't overload on it. There are some people who watch way too much bad news. They'll watch it on the TV and then they'll check out the internet and they get too absorbed in it and then they get depressed. And like I said, my thing is don't overload, and then make sure you get a good balance of the positive stuff. In a way, it's a little bit like eating bad food, junk food. It's bad for your body. Bad negative stuff all the time is bad for your mind.
Well, like we were talking about Zig Ziglar in here before we started recording. He was the one that was saying that, right? What goes in your mind?
Yeah, I went to a workshop with him many, many years ago, and he started off by saying, you are what you are because of what goes into your mind. And I still remember one of the stories he told that really hit home with everybody in the audience. He asked this question. He said, would you allow anybody to walk into the living room of your home with 200-pound sacks over each shoulder? I don't know if anybody could carry that, but anyway, that's what he said. And he said they're full of garbage, and would you allow that person to dump that garbage into your living room? And people are wondering why would he ask this silly question? No person alive would allow anybody to dump garbage in your living room. So then he hesitates for a minute and lets people think about the question. And then he says, do you ever let people dump trash into your mind? And boy, there was silence for a long time, and people start thinking, ooh, boy, yes, I do. And that's part of that is just being aware, of what's going into your mind. And of course, I grew up without social media, and you had mentioned it earlier, Graham. But social media, I think, when it started, had a good intention. And it still can be really good. I'm on Facebook. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but it helps me stay in touch with friends, see pictures of their kids, where they travel. But then sometimes it can get political, and then an organization that's really nasty can get a hold of their own program, and it's like everything else. There's capacity for good and bad.
Yeah. So when I was reading your book about the positive words, it's funny, I was asking the question in my head, and then you answered it in the book a little bit about what changed in the 80s. Like when you were monitoring like speech in classrooms, and you were really trying to teach classrooms not to cuss and to think, to talk positively, think positively. I did like how you included a bunch of real life examples in that book of perception changes and attitude changes. And but what do you think, something shifted in the 80s, or was it?
Yeah, it did. It really did shift, because when I started teaching, I just turned 80 a couple days ago, so it was a long time ago that I started teaching. My first year of teaching was 1965. That was in university, and then the next year I started teaching full-time in high school. So it was the 66, 67 school year, which obviously a really long time ago. But the kids dressed well on campus. We had a strict dress code. The teachers had a strict dress code. You absolutely did not swear, and you acted respectfully, and so on. And then the late 60s, was the Vietnam War and protest movements and so on, and things began to change. And then the dress code went, and I'm not complaining about this. I'm just saying times changed. But the language started getting harsher and harsher. And I remember one time I had a talk with our principal, and he was concerned about the language of the kids, and he had some interesting thoughts about it. So I said, well, it's worth discussion. And I had a psychology class, and I said, would you want to talk to my class about it? So he said, sure. So he came down, and he said to the kids, he said, there's a lot of words we hear on campus now that we don't, that we didn't used to hear. Now, this is a guy in his 60s in a coat. He's the principal, coat and tie. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, I'm not going to tell you to never swear under any circumstances. He says, when you're out with your friends and you're the only ones that hear it, you're not going to offend anybody. He said, I may be golfing with my buddies and there's some swearing and it's no big deal. He said, but I don't go home and sit down at dinner and tell my wife, pass the fucking salt. And the kids were so shocked, to hear him say that. But he really made his point. He said there's a time and a place for everything, and learn that there are different levels of language. And so one of the things that I always said to the kids at the beginning of the year, oh, by the way, back in my early days of teaching, girls didn't swear either. They would have died before they'd say the F word, and they didn't swear at all. But all of that changed. But what I did in a way of addressing it is that I kind of used his example. There are two levels of language. And I would ask the kids, are there any places you go that swearing is inappropriate? Okay, for some it was home, for some not, because some of them learned the F word from their parents, but others didn't allow swearing. Most of them said their grandparents didn't swear. If they belonged to a place of worship, they said you don't swear there. The ones that had jobs, many of them had jobs where you had to be careful about your language. So I said, so there are some places that you're not allowed to use filthy language. They said, yes. And I said, this classroom is one of them. I said, we're not going to lower the level of conversation by speaking like that. I said, if you do it privately, that's your business, but don't do it in a place where you're going to offend other people. And that's a rule I apply to myself,
Do you think that happened from parenting in the 60s then, 60s and 70s?
Yes, absolutely. Graham, in my career, I probably taught 50 kids whose parents I had taught.
Oh, yeah.
So I saw the difference of that generation. And of course, society had changed. The culture had changed, and I mean, dress was different, music was different, language was different. The movies back in the old days, it was shocking when, who was it? Clark Gable in a movie in, was it the 40s or 50s? He said, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And that was shocking to hear the word damn, and now hardly anything is shocking.
You notice that even on cable, right? Like some of the stuff that you would have never seen on TV 10 years ago now. Like
No.
Now it's just like they're swearing just on cable now.
Yeah. Well, remember we went to, you guys might be too young, but we went to R-rated movies.
Yep.
I don't know where you may have.
Well, by the time I was a kid, it didn't really matter. Like I could go to the video store and rent an R-rated movie when I was 10 and nobody cared.
Yeah. And basically R meant you could see naked bodies or hear the F word. That's really what it meant.
Or maybe some gore. Yeah, one of those three for sure.
Yeah.
So the other thing I found interesting in your book was I don't know if I could do it, but I might try, is that not to complain for 24 hours. Like you had that test of, because I think it's really important to try and keep that, or there's power in not complaining, right? And keeping a positive attitude, positive reinforcement. So there's a couple questions, I guess, around that is because I learned years ago in like a couple leadership courses about positive reinforcement, but maybe you can talk about how, deriding somebody even in a work or personal environment, is not going to be helpful, but positive reinforcement will help create that behavior that you want to see.
Absolutely.
Maybe you could drill into that a bit.
Well, one of the examples I gave in that chapter was I went to college on a basketball scholarship, and I had, back in those days, you couldn't play on the varsity as a freshman. So I played on the freshman team my first year, and the coach I had, I just absolutely loved him. He was everything you'd want in a coach. He had been a good player himself. He was smart. He just was he cared about us so much. And then the next year I moved up to varsity, and the varsity coach, who had won a couple national championships, he quit because of health reasons. So the guy that I had as my freshman coach, I had him again when I was a sophomore on the varsity, and everything he did brought out the best in me as a person and as a player. But he didn't want to be head coach. He had a furniture business on the side, and he made more money there, so he left after my sophomore year. The next 2 years, and I tell the story in the book, the coach I had my junior and senior year is one of the worst human beings I've ever known in my life. And it mainly because what came out of his mouth. He humiliated people. He screamed at people. He would get in your face and tell you how awful you were with every swear word he could think of. He would sometimes spit on you. This is a Jesuit university that I'm at, and I don't think any of the priests or any of the administration really knew that he was doing this. But he, I saw him really destroy some athletes, and it was really sad. A coach, like a teacher, is supposed to bring out the best in you. And every word that, I mean, he had just, like I say, the filthy language, but the meanness of it too. It can be devastating.
So do you think our culture got stuck in like a tough love sort of suck it up, cry it off mentality to a certain extent, or?
Well, maybe for a while, but then the big complaint you hear
came
about
back too
now
far
is
the other way.
Everybody gets a trophy, that type of thing, which I don't believe in. I think people have to. In my first book, I have a chapter that says, "Don't be afraid to fail. Everyone else has." And you can fail your way to success. It just that you make mistakes, you learn from your mistakes, and you move on. But the everybody gets a trophy thing, I don't. I think that's more damaging than helpful.
It's like a pendulum sometimes, where it's maybe it'll balance out sometime. I don't know. Sometimes it just seems to get going worse.
Yeah, right. But I want to go back, Graham, to the thing about complaining, because I wrote about that again in this book. It's a story that had such a profound influence, not only on me, but on my teaching, because every year that I taught, whether it was adults, the adults that I taught at the university were most of them in their 30s and 40s, and some of them older. And then I taught high school kids, but I issued that challenge. It's called the Bruce Diazzo Memorial Challenge. It's named after a guy that I went to college with who was paralyzed from polio. And the most amazing thing about him was I had a friend that lived with him for 6 years. And he said in 6 years, he saw Bruce suffer. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't move his legs. But he never once complained about anything. And I was just astounded when I heard that. I did know Bruce, and I didn't hear him complain, but I wasn't around him. I didn't live with him day to day. And I remember when he died, I was telling my students about him, and I said, this guy was so unbelievable. And I said, and I learned that he never ever complained about anything. And then I just kind of thought for a second, and I said, that's my phone. I'm hoping that my wife is going to pick it up upstairs. Okay, she did. But anyway, let's see where I got lost on the phone.
About the Bruce complaining about never ever complaining.
Yeah. So I said to the kids, I explained how this guy had polio and he was paralyzed and he got sick a lot. And I said, but he never complained. I said, just kind of off the top of my head, I said, I'll bet you guys couldn't go 24 hours without complaining. And then we started talking about it. And one kid I remember said right away, he says, oh, that'd be impossible. And I says, well, you want to try it? We got to talking about it. So I said, okay, the challenge starts. It was about 9 a.m. It was the end of my first class. And I said, you see if you can go 24 hours without complaining. And then somebody said, is moaning or groaning complaining? I said, yes. and I figured there were a couple of others too. It was saying shit when you're mad. Is that complaining? I said, yeah, I would call that a complaint. And so they came back the next day, and I didn't know what to expect because I'd never done it before. And I said, raise your hand if you went 24 hours without complaining. And not a single kid raised his hand. And I said, whoa. I said, what happened? I said, how long did you go? And most of them said about 2 minutes. And then some of the kids said, I gave up after about 5 minutes. I said, well, why only 2 minutes? They said, well, they started complaining as soon as they got out of class. And one of the things that kids realize is we live in a culture of complaint. And one of the things they realized is that it's like the bad news stuff. It's around you all the time, and it penetrates and it becomes part of your being. You are what you are because of what goes into your mind. Yeah. We hear a lot of complaints every day. Yeah, it's hard to do. I mean, I used to consider myself, I still do somewhat a positive person, but it's hard to not complain. I mean, I find myself doing it all the time now. And I really do think it affects my state of being. I really do feel like if I'm in a state of gratitude, positively thinking, it does affect me physiologically. Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the science is there. Like, well, I shouldn't say that. The science isn't there, but we know there's this crazy weird thing with the placebo that we gotta to worry about, and we gotta factor that into any experiments we want to do, because the human mind, or maybe the doctor's mind, is going to affect the experiment.
Right.
And then we come from a thing when we're complaining all day, and you wonder if just ancient man 10,000 years ago or whatever was spent his day in a constant state of worry and complaint, or if he was just, you wonder if that thing about giving thanks for, it's because I'm not a religious person. I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. But you can kind of see where that praying before or after a meal it kind of comes from giving thanks. Like in my culture, it's more of a give thanks when you kill an animal or something like that, and it does sort of affect that relationship. And we've got this thing where you can't do a science experiment without 2 layers of protection from this placebo effect, and you got to wonder what being negative and complaining and worrying all day are doing, especially when we're also a culture that's sicker than ever mentally and physically.
Yeah, but Darren, you hit on one of the key things, and it's emphasized in the new book too, is about being thankful. I was amazed at how much research there has been on thankfulness. There's a professor whose last name is Emmons, and he's supposed to be the guru, I guess, based on his research of, and I quote him in the book and mention his first name and the university, and he's written some books and so on. But I think the title of my chapter in the book is Thankful People Find More Good. And if you're finding more good, then that means you're putting more good into your mind and probably leading a healthier life. But I can still remember one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned was my mom taught me when I was about 9 or 10 years old about what it meant to be thankful and why I should be thankful. It was kind of a lesson in poverty and so on. But I'll always remember my mom, and she was a very, very thankful person. She said to me one time, and I quoted her in the book, "The happiest people in the world aren't the people who have the most things. The happiest people in the world are the people who are thankful for what they do have."
Yeah.
There's a lot of wisdom in that statement. And she told me about the way she grew up on a farm in Missouri. My dad grew up on a farm in Oregon, and boy, they didn't have much, but they were thankful for what they did have. And like my father, his parents came from Lithuania, where they were ruled by the Russian Tsar, and they didn't even have any freedom. And they came over and were able to start a farm of their own. And I can remember going to the farm. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have indoor plumbing. This is way back in the 1940s. So it kind of shows you how old I am. But I still remember that. They didn't have those things, but they were thankful for what they had, especially freedom. And my friend Bruce used to always talk about opportunity. He said when he woke up in the morning, he said he was a believer. He was a devout Catholic. And he said, "Thank you, God, for this day and all the blessings that will come with it." And he said, "And thank you for the opportunities that I have all day long, all ahead of me, to touch somebody else's life, to learn something, to become better." And those two words, thankfulness and opportunity, are magical if you use them all the time, because he taught me to use them. And I do.
And projecting that positive future. I mean, he's saying it as if he's already got it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he woke up knowing that the day was going to be full of opportunity instead of hazards or risks or things like that. And he trained himself to have a positive outlook.
Yeah.
And then you do things and things tend to happen, and then those sort of piggyback off of each other as you go down the road, and the next thing you know, you've created this new life out of nothing, and you wonder how you got there.
Yeah.
So you're 80, been around since the 40s. So you've seen sort of like the advent of like this first television, and then network news, and then 24/7 news, and then social media up to the minute or up to the second news. Right. What have you noticed as a difference, and you're like tuned into it as well because of your writing? What have you noticed on just like the general social mental health over that time span? Like, do you think that the inundation of bad news is affecting us culturally?
I think it has, along with some other things. The fact that we're moving so fast and that we're bombarded with all kinds of information and so on, and there's so much pressure to be cool and to be successful and have all of these things. And I think when I was growing up, and I'm not one of these people my age who says we were better than the present. I don't say that at all. I think each generation really in many ways gets better. But when we were growing up, the messages were more simple. Okay, we didn't have social media. I grew up in a town. We never had TV until I was a freshman in high school. We had one channel, and then about 2 years later, we got a second channel. All the TV was in black and white. They were all wholesome, programs like Ozzie and Harriet. You guys may not have ever heard of Ozzie and Harriet, but anyway, but it was just the message that we got was work hard, be respectful, and things will work out for you. And that was kind of a simple message, but there was a lot of truth to that. That would still be true today. Work hard, be respectful of other people. But today they're bombarded with hundreds and hundreds of messages, and like I say, I saw the change between the kids I taught in the 60s and their kids who I taught in the 80s and 90s.
So what do you think should people just, because, this is something Darren's been preaching last few weeks, last couple months for sure, is put the phone down, get away from your TV. What do you think we need to do as a society to stay a little healthier?
Okay. Are you guys familiar with that program that's showing now on Netflix called Social Dilemma?
I just watched that the other day, actually.
Yeah, I just finished it last night. I couldn't watch a whole bunch of it at one time. I could watch about 30 minutes of it at one time because it was so full of stuff to think about. But I think, one of the points they make is that there was a guy near the end and he gave 3 rules, and I can't remember all 3 of them, but the cell phone does not go into the bedroom with the kids when they go to bed at night. And then there was a limit to how much screen time they could have during the day. And there was one other one, and I can't remember what it was, but I remember I live in the area where Steve Jobs lived. He lived a couple cities down from me, and he had very, very strict rules about his kids and screen time because he knew it was addictive, and it is. There have been books about, and that's a big thing, I think, because as you know, a lot of adults are addicted. It's not uncommon to go to a restaurant. Well, different these days because of COVID, but in normal times, you see a family of 5 or 6 sitting at a table in a restaurant, and every one of them has their cell phone out.
Yeah, it's the business model. That's what people need to understand. That's the business model. There's a reason that all those apps are free. It's because they get paid by the more time you spend on them, and they're tracking every second of it. They know how much time you're spending on it. And so this phone is actively working against you to try and get you to spend more time on it, probably looking at negative things. And that's if you're an adult. I mean, when you take that social media down to the younger generation, then you get into the research of Jonathan Haidt, which shows that, teen suicide and preteen suicide and cutting has tripled or quadrupled in 10 years, which just happens to coincide with when social media became available on smartphones. Yeah,
and one of the real sad things about social media is that bullying really increased, and kids put each other down on social media, and then a kid finds out that the whole world, you say something awful about this person, and it's accessible to everybody, and it's humiliating to them, and it's painful. And in these character education conferences, I've heard a lot of mothers whose kids committed suicide talk about bullying and social media. And that bullying is one of those issues that character education programs have really tried hard to address.
Yeah. So what about free speech in that way? I mean, because I feel like, negative speech, hate speech is almost like a spell in a way. It's bad. It can do bad. I think it can do more bad than people think, but you mentioned free speech a little bit in one of your previous books, in the context of saying bad things, negative things, but how do you police it, or should it be policed? I mean, should it be policed organically, or should there be, I feel like the pendulum again that we're talking about has swung to the other way, where the people that are against hate speech are also very hateful. I mean, it's a two-way, it's a hypocritical thing in a way. I mean, you can't really get rid of hate with hate. I mean.
Yeah. And it's too many people, I think, interpret the free speech amendment as you can say anything you want anytime, under any circumstances. And that's not really true. One of the examples that a Supreme Court justice gave many, many years ago, I can't remember who it was, but he said free speech is not unlimited if it leads to serious damage and hurt of other people. He said, for instance, he says, if you are in a crowded theater and you sit up and you start screaming, you stand up and you start screaming, fire, fire, and everybody starts running and so on, and there is no fire. He said that kind of speech is, I forget what he called it, but it was dangerous and endangered other people's lives and so on. And he said, so it's not limitless. And I think we have to show some judgment about some of the things that, that we say. It's like the interpretation of the Second Amendment about weapons. The founding fathers didn't mean for everyday citizens to walk around with AK-47s, but of course there weren't any at that time, but that wasn't the reasoning behind the weapon thing. And so we have to sometimes look back into the Constitution and see what was thinking behind it. Why did they need to add this amendment?
Yeah.
Do you think we can pull out of the tailspin?
It's really hard to say. When you look at the results of the recent election, where 70 million voted for Trump and about 75 million or so have voted for Biden, and they're pretty diametrically different. It shows how divided we are. And I think it's going to take some real work for Biden and his team to bring it all together. It may be one of the biggest challenges yet.
What role do you think I sometimes wonder if we just shut off all the TVs for like 6 months, what would come out of that?
It would probably be good, because it would require people to find hopefully useful things to do and other things to do with their time. But whenever we take things away from people, like COVID has taken a lot of things away from us, I think that not having a normal social life is one of the hardest things of COVID. But for other people, it would be the economic, losing jobs, not having enough money to pay bills and all of that kind of stuff. But the social aspect of it, I think, has really been damaging too. And there's a lot of statistics to show the mental health issues because of a lack of social.
And then so it's daily bad news piled on top of that.
Yeah, right. And I've never seen a news cycle like 2020. It's just almost, I know that we watch NBC News that comes on at 5:30 p.m. here, which would be 8:30 Eastern time. But after I watch that 30 minutes of news, there's actually probably 22 or 23 minutes of it, because the rest is commercials. But that's about all the news I can take for one evening. Sometimes I switch over to PBS, and my wife and I look at each other and we say, we've had enough news for one, and we turn to something lighter, just so you don't have to deal with the heavy stuff. And it just proves my point in the book, is that there's just so much of the negative stuff that you should take. And then, of course, the media has tools now to bombard you with graphics of buildings exploded and people being shot and all of that type of thing, that makes it even more harsh.
Yeah.
Did you notice anything that shows what the delay is? Like from, say, something like a high bad news event like 2020 with COVID and, the brink of civil war, it would seem like, and everything else. Like, how long do you think, and you talk about the social problem, we not being able to socialize, and you've got all this bad news piled on top of it, is that like mental health and that adverse effects, is that instant, or is this something you think we'll see play out over the next 10 years? Or
well, I think once we can start returning to normal, and that's why I'm so hopeful that even though it's going to be months, there's some good news on the developing of the vaccine. But I think once we have that vaccine and people feel safe to go out and resume normal life. One of the things I hope is that it will make people appreciate normal life rather than take it for granted. And they say, "Oh boy, everything is back." And I think we've gone through a really, really rough time. Everybody's got to realize that we need to work together to put things together. To try to bring things together and work towards something more positive, because the negativity and the fighting has only made matters worse. One of the thoughts that's been running through my head is my next book after this one gets out there, and the title that keeps popping in my head is "Whatever Happened to Win-Win and the Golden Rule." Stephen Covey wrote about win-win, and it just makes perfect sense that when we try to help each other and solve our problems together, then we both win. We compromise, but we reach a thing where we can go forward in peace. So.
Yeah.
That seems to be what happened to capitalism too, or the market, or however you want to look at it. It's like it can work good, but then when you get all this weird sort of backroom deals and regulating out competition, and like then you got these like super monopolies and all that stuff, and it's just like it became this thing where it was almost predatory. It's almost like a lot of things I think in Western culture have become predatory. The media seems to have become predatory. The social media seems predatory in a way. The advertisers, and now that on top of it, it just
It's I have a friend that made a lot of money, and he said to me once, he said, one of the reasons that people are always, even the ones that are filthy rich, he said they're always trying to get more. He said, because no one can answer the question, how much is enough? And I remember when he said that, I kind of smiled, because I could say how much is enough. I was a teacher, and I didn't make very much money at all. I had to moonlight my entire career. I had 2 night jobs besides a regular job, and I worked in the summers. And my goal in terms of finances was just to be financially secure, to have enough money saved that if, like, we had a big plumbing problem in our home, and about 3 years ago, and the house had to be torn up and all of that kind of stuff. And insurance covered a big chunk of it, but I was left with having to pay $15,000. Now, back when I was teaching, that would have devastated me. That would have wiped me out. But I've put money aside for those kinds of things. So that's what I mean by financial security. I don't mean having millions and millions of dollars, but just I was very careful about my retirement, and so I've got money, coming in, and have money saved. So that's I think that should be the goal. But again, what really bothers me is when I see the top. No, it's not just 1%, it's less than 1% of these people that have an incredible percentage of the nation's wealth. And then you've got so many people that are just struggling that also have to work 2 and 3 jobs to try to make ends meet. And I don't know what those people that have, when I hear how many billions of dollars that they have, I always wonder, what do they do with it?
Or they make $8 billion in one day somehow.
Yeah.
What?
I mean, but what do you do with it? Shouldn't you, if you love your country, shouldn't you be pouring it back some way into to the better? I mean, at least Bill Gates has saved a lot of lives and has done a lot of good things for education and invested in medicine and all of that kind of stuff. But a lot of them don't do that at all. One guy was interviewed about why he didn't give more away. And he said, because if I gave more away, I wouldn't be listed in the top 10 richest people in the world. That's just sick to me. When you have more money than you could ever spend. And
and then you have the problem of these guys having the money and them kind of getting, now you've got one guy that gets to decide where it goes.
Yeah.
like in the Bill Gates example. So he gets to decide where that goes. Whereas if that was public money, or if that was, whereas it might have been better if that money was just dispersed into the lower levels of, of society.
Yeah, but you
so
don't
there
want
was
them
less
to become
poverty.
middle class or anything. Then they become too powerful. I mean, honestly.
Well, there does seem to be that the middle class is not having a good start to the decade, and the last one wasn't great for them either. Nor was the one before.
When I was growing up, there was a general belief that the strength of our country was the fact that we had a very, very large, strong middle class.
Yep.
And that doesn't exist anymore. And I think we have, in many ways, lost one of the great strengths of our country, because that the middle class has really shrunk, and what's some people now call middle class, they're really struggling.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to very clearly become an oligarchy in a lot of ways. And
Yeah,
I wonder
right.
if, like, in the 50s, did it seem like that? I mean, looking back, they kind of slant it that it kind of seems like it always has been. But I don't know. It seems like lately it's like super apparently that if you've got money, you've got different rules.
Oh, you're right.
And you're not getting in the Senate or the Congress. I mean, they let a couple people in just so that it doesn't, you got your AOCs, and they'll let a couple of those people in just so that, hey, anyone can get in here. But let's be honest. I mean, there's never going to be enough people that aren't from the establishment to pass a vote.
Yeah. No, you're right on that. It's I can still remember now. In the 50s, I was a kid and even still a teenager in the late 50s. But I can still remember my dad, who was an uneducated iron worker. I can remember him saying, "This is a damn plutocracy," and I never heard that word. I didn't know what that word meant. And then later, I think when I probably didn't pay attention, and then I might ask my mother, "What does that mean?" And I think she said it's ruled by the rich, and it's become more so. So my dad was actually right. And if you go back to the founding fathers, there was a historian by the name of Hofstadter who said, these guys that wrote the Constitution, they weren't all gung-ho democracy, everybody's equal. That's not who they were. They said, let the people who own the country rule the country. And they said things like that at the Constitutional Convention. So it's been part of our system for a long time.
Well, I think you used to need land to vote, didn't you?
Pardon me?
Didn't you used to need land to vote?
Yes, you're right. You had to be a property owner. Yeah.
And now what's funny is you see people arguing for that again. I've actually seen that flying around social media.
Okay. Yeah. No, remember, it was white men who owned property who could vote. That's that limit. Black minorities didn't vote and women didn't vote.
And then you wonder if the votes even matter, or if it's just because if the votes mattered, you'd think it wouldn't be a plutocracy.
Yeah.
How does that happen? How do we keep voting for these rich people?
So when's your new book coming out?
It doesn't come out until May, so I've got.
Okay, that'll go by fast though.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that it doesn't come out until May, because I think we've still got some bad news left for this year. The COVID is going crazy right now, and we're having problems with Trump admitting that he lost, and so I think once the new year comes and we see some change and we see some progress with a vaccine, things will start lightening up. So maybe my timing will be good. People will be ready for not only some good news, but be ready for a little bit of help on finding more good news and putting more good stuff up here.
Right.
Speaking of that, I promised my wife I'd help her.
Yeah, we'll let you go.
Yeah, before I let you go, one more question. In your
Sure.
80 years and all the books, if you could just give one piece of advice to the people listening now, what would be the one thing you've learned in your time?
I think the most important thing I've learned in my life is that I'm not the center of the universe, and that the more good I do for other people, the more it comes back to me. But it has to go out first. You can't just be receiving all the time. I keep a little quote here on my desk. I don't know if you can see that. It's just a little card. And basically what it says, this was written by Horace Mann, who was the father of public education, so obviously one of my heroes, but he said, we do ourselves the most good doing something good for others. And that's kind of my life philosophy right now. And I grew up the opposite way, where I thought everything was about me and so on. And I'm really glad I was able to overcome that one, but I had to have a lot of help along the way.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks
sure.
for your
I
help along the way.
Really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And that was our chat with Hal Urban. What'd you think, buddy?
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, it was a good one.
That was good books. Simple truths.
Simple truths. Good.
Yeah. Watch what goes in your head. Watch what comes out of your mouth. Let's hope Biden fixes that thing after 47 years. He'll be able to just pull it together.
I forget. You must have just had your tongue bit for the whole.
No. It's just interesting.
that's a good example
It's just
of how-
interesting. So
How people can have completely different politics.
yeah,
And still
have a conversation.
agree on most
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
probably.
I mean, I'm not going to push back on stuff like that. I'm not going to
No,
argue
it's
about
pointless.
Biden and all, but
It's
hopefully
pointless.
the vaccine helps, and
Here's the thing: even if you and I aren't vaccine people, if the vaccine being available
If it
chills,
helps,
because here's
oh,
the
yeah.
thing, like I just went out traveling, and people are freaking the fuck out. Like I seen people in the airport freaking the fuck out that
Yeah.
they were traveling. They can. I mean, I seen those people at the airport a couple weeks ago that put on the suit. Remember, I sent you the picture. We're coming out, and they're putting
that was
on
real?
That was real.
Oh.
Those are people flying someplace.
Yeah.
So it makes you, if those people can just chill out, if that makes them feel better, whatever. I'm not getting it.
So the middle class
I
has
don't
been
want it to be
torn apart, and
mandatory.
the middle class has been. There's some weird things going on, right?
Oh,
We talk
yeah.
about the middle class has been destroyed, but the guy who's been in office for 47 years will fix it. But it's okay. I mean,
I think it's up to us to fix it.
I think we watch what we put in our heads and watch what comes out of our mouth.
You know,
I
we need more
agree with him on the
Grimerican here.
speech stuff. I agree with him on all that stuff. I really do. His book was interesting. Stop complaining.
Stop complaining is the number one.
Be helpful. Be grateful.
It's harder than you think. I'd like to see the audience try and go like 3 hours without complaining.
Yeah.
Anyway, big thanks to Hal for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Extra big thanks if you're a supporter, because we need those. We need more of those. Grimerica.ca/support. If you're getting some value from the show, send it back our way. It'd be lovely. We'd love you for it. We love you anyway, but we'd love you a little more if you support it. Grimerica.ca/support. There's a bunch of ways to support the show for free. You can spam Graham. Rate the show, review the show, join the chats. Grimerica.ca/chats. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, wait. We gotta stop the live stream too before. Thanks. We'll see you
Okay.
tomorrow.
We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Completely different episode tomorrow.
What's tomorrow, Charlie Robinson?
Charlie Robinson. I'm just listening to his book on how the controlled demolition of the American Empire.